Hello, I hope everyone can hear me. There may be people joining, and I hope there won't be any audio issues. I come from the Chris Howard Show, and we must all be grateful to him for providing a safe space for us to all develop our thoughts in such a polite and civil way. And it seemed today that a lot of ideas that are currently being discussed separately as separate topics in the TLC are coming together. And obviously this is a good thing. In that it is true, having these honest debates where accusations are sometimes made, true or false. It doesn't really matter because, at the end of the day, our feelings do not much matter. It is our ability to arrive at the truth. And while people are not necessarily that keen on the truth, we must come to a decision when we decide for ourselves whether lying or telling the truth is a survival strategy. And obviously, many people are conflicted by this because they do see that telling the truth sometimes results in disadvantages and loss of status, and therefore they don't want to be telling the truth and causing themselves loss of status. And obviously sometimes telling a lie is a survival strategy. But I'm just posing the hypothetical question of, surely we would prefer to live in a society where telling the truth is a survival strategy rather than telling a lie is a survival strategy. I think that the choice is pretty obvious. If we care about freedom of belief and freedom of expression. I think I'll have to blow my nose. Excuse me a moment. I hope that I properly mute myself. Yes, so we were talking about the rules of Catholicism because Paul Vanderklay just produced a video about two American women with very divergent views on abortion who are Catholic going to the same church, and nobody making anything of it. And this would indicate that the procedural in religion is not the same as the propositional. So it means that your political beliefs are irrelevant to your membership of the church. But once upon a time, Catholics were excommunicated for, well, quite little things. Not having the correct view on the divinity of Jesus, I don't know, not coming to confession often enough, refusing to go to church. Who knows? But the point is, these rules were more fiercely and rigorously enforced once upon a time. And we could even conclude that these rules were so fiercely enforced, even on European monarchs, that eventually they rebelled. So we know how in dramas, well, maybe you didn't see many of those, but there would be the wedding ceremony in a church, and the couple would be saying their wedding vows, and you come to the final bit, to love, honour, and obey till death do us part. And this implicitly means that you're not allowed to divorce your spouse. And so the legal device of allowing you to divorce your spouse was to pretend that the marriage never took place. That is the meaning of an annulment. It never happened, and therefore you can now live apart and escape from the horrors of being married to your spouse that you want to leave. But of course, only very wealthy people could apply to the Pope for an annulment. Ordinary people would just have to put up with their horrible spouses until death, or murder, I suppose, if you wanted to hurry such things along. So I think it is certainly more humane to tolerate divorce for certain stated reasons, to show that the purpose of the marriage was completely defeated by the ability or the behaviour of one of the parties to the marriage. And this seems fair enough. So, have I completed my point about Catholicism? Yes, so Catholics basically wear their Catholicism like a woman would wear accessories to her dress. Her accessories being, a belt, a pair of earrings, a necklace, bracelets, bangles, scarf, that sort of thing, to prettify herself. But when really the whole purpose of religion is to be worn as an armour, or even carried as a weapon. I suppose my analyses of the original purpose of these institutions is, well, unromantic, but I don't care. I think the Romantic movement is probably the beginning, or one of the beginnings, of the decline and fall of Western civilization. And what is a Romantic movement but the worship of the emotions? We can understand why we might want to be awed by the grandeur of scenery, or by our, emotions of romantic love and all that sort of thing. But the point is that these emotions passed. We can't stay in that state of bliss. And that's why maybe some people create heaven as a place where we can enjoy eternal bliss. And some people, in order to cheat, to get to that place of transcendence will take drugs to get there. And maybe that explains why so many people have substance abuse problems. They probably think it is their right to feel good, even though they don't currently feel good, but obviously taking to drink and drugs might give you a temporary high, and some people might think they even deserve to become intoxicated, but obviously if this pattern of behaviour of self-induced intoxication takes place once too often, we will then be having to deal with the problem of unmanageable behaviour and addictive behaviour, leading to crime, chaos, and confusion. And we now live in a time of great moral and intellectual confusion. But I'm also saying it can be easily sorted out if only there were a proper hierarchy. And this, I'm afraid, has been confused by feminism, because men and women are supposed to be equal. You can resolve the issue by saying men and women are equally important in the production of the next generation, and one cannot do without the other, but they are different, and they have to logically and necessarily be different in order to find parenthood rewarding and viable and self-sustaining. And to this end, marriage was invented to regulate sexual and gender relations. And this means the operation of gender roles, which require men to do certain things and women to do certain things. And we're back to the marriage vows of love, honour and obey. And those of you who remembered the spectacular wedding of the Prince of Wales, Charles as he then was, with Diana, with Lady Diana, then you will know that she got his names wrong and she refused to say obey, and nobody thought anything of it. But I think women way back then who said they would obey probably didn't, and might have been, even in pre-feminist days, a bit of a handful for their husbands. But the point is, I think we're all going to break the rules. If we had a marriage contract, sometimes we will, stray below the standard the rules are supposed to maintain, and it might even be tolerated by our spouse for a while, or maybe consistently. But the point is, I think we exist. We are allowed to operate by, some say, the grace of God, or the indulgence of our government. Because in any legal action, the judge might be, supportive of our cause, or against it, but of course he's supposed to be impartial. But there's some, ruling that one of the lawyers will say, well, because of this principle, or because of this precedent, you are obliged to find in favour of my client and against, the other person. So we can play around with these rules as much as we like, but these rules are helpful in allowing us to solve our problems. And since humanity has existed for such a long time and has all these tools of knowledge and history and legal systems at our disposal, why don't we use it? But I think it's not being used simply because the hierarchy is broken. People are basically saying, it's not my problem, it's not my place, it's more than my job's worth, I'm not going to be the one to sacrifice my status, my property, my well-being. For the greater good, because there's nothing that says I have to. What was I saying? Yes, these rules that have accumulated over so many eons give us a vast amount of knowledge to look back on, and histories and systems, and we should just look at what has happened before and see if there's been any similar problems that have occurred. So I'm saying we don't like rules. We think we can sense our way around the problem without looking at the instruction manual, which is so boring, and every one of us has done this. I mean, there are some people who like reading instruction manuals, but then we prefer to read other things, and we think just by our own cleverness we can figure things out, and we don't need to be told by anyone. And the consequence of this could be that we waste our time, we waste our energy, we might even destroy or make our electronic equipment or whatever it is malfunction because we messed around with it too much. But I'm saying, just read the manual. And I'm saying the manual is divine revelation. And I guess I go on and on the way I do because I am utterly convinced that I have the solution. And it's so simple. So why am I being ignored and marginalised and disabled from commenting? And, I get it that, if you have something you don't want to hear, then you avoid the person, If you have somebody collecting, wanting to remind you of something you don't want to do, then obviously that person is to be avoided. Understandably. People avoid, hospitals and doctors for very good reason, and so they should avoid, lawyers. Because in a way these people are parasitical upon people's problems. But then the idea of using them is, if you don't use them, the problem becomes bigger and worse. Yes, I do apologise for my cold. I mean, sometimes you can just solve your problem, your congestion, by blowing your nose, but it's not working. Because I'm still congested after so many attempts to blow my nose, but I I feel I should continue this monologue because I think it's very important well, to listen to Chris Howard's stream and to understand. I think the resolution to all these problems, because I think a lot of problems are caused by not understanding the teleology of certain concepts. So Chris Howard was talking about how he came to the TLC because he liked what Paul van der Klee was saying about gay marriage being the end of Protestantism. It wouldn't be the end of just Protestantism, it would be the end of, well, your religious group, whatever it is. I mean, imagine if your religious group just said, well, we'll all be gaily married and not be heterosexually, traditionally married, then, after a few decades, you'll all be dead and gone with no replacement. So, in a way, it's obvious. And the obvious arguments that would have come, that actually were being used at the time gay marriage was going through, was that, yes, I remember a black American man saying, yeah, I'll give you gay marriage if you're capable of producing offspring. Yeah, we'll give it to you. But, until and unless same-sex couples can produce offspring and properly parent them, and prove that they are capable of properly parenting them, same-sex marriage should never come into being. And if same-sex couples want to live together, there's nothing stopping them from doing so. So this important principle was utterly undermined by the Church of England, because there is some. Yes, in the Book of Common Prayer, there is this, I think I have it somewhere. Marriage is an honourable estate between a man and a woman. So they had to actually change this definition of marriage to push gay marriage through in the UK. They actually had to change the Book of Common Prayer. The definition of marriage, it's so utterly disgraceful, and nobody batted an eyelid, right? And I know that in the 50s that there were, all these, I think they were called bright young things, in the time of Evelyn Waugh, who were Anglicans who decided to convert to Catholicism. Let me just check if I'm right about this. Bright young things. Evelyn Waugh. So you might think that's, a bit eccentric for bright young things were mentioned in Evelyn Waugh's second novel, Vile Bodies. Who were a group of young aristocrats and bohemians in 1920s London. Okay, so certainly not these men in the 1950s who were Anglicans converting to Catholicism. Why did they convert to Catholicism? Because they thought the Catholic Church would not be, giving up all these would not be liberalising, because they are the ancient church. Rather like Mark Parker thinking, because it's ancient, it must be better. But, if you want to be that ancient one, why don't you go back to, Judaism and see how the Jews are doing? Yeah, I know a lot of people think, the Jews are doing just fine, but they are utterly without any of the mechanism that they need to operate their religion. They are truly the religion of social clubs. They have no Sanhedrin, which is, the ancient body of, judges to decide on matters. It was a Sanhedrin that tried Jesus for blasphemy. That's how it was when Judaism was supposed to be operating. Before the Romans took over. And as for chief rabbis, that's actually a, a Gentile imperial position. So if you are made chief rabbi, it just means that some Gentile empire had conquered you, and you as chief rabbi would be given the task of collecting taxes from your fellow Jews, and you would be incentivized by saying, well, if you collect more than X number of shekels, the rest is yours. So chief rabbis were rather resented by their fellow Jews because they worked for Gentiles and didn't necessarily mean well for their own fellow Jews. Another example would be the Governor General. So the Governor General is basically, if a certain territory has a Governor General, it means that you don't have an independent foreign policy. It means that you are being administered as a colony by an empire located elsewhere. And Australia, Canada, and New Zealand have Governor Generals. And it was the case that Governor Generals can dismiss elected Prime Ministers. For no reason at all, So we know that in the 1975 Australian constitutional crisis, Gough Whitlam was dismissed by John Kerr, the Governor General, because he said no to CIA listening posts. He said no to US naval and military bases in Australia. So he was dismissed. So this is the reality. You can find it in The Guardian, but I think the problem is people are not putting two and two together, or maybe they have. I have, and I present it to them as one piece of information, and they break it in two, and they want to forget because they don't want to know. But I'm saying it would profit them to understand their position, so they know how to act accordingly. This is really what it's all about. We need to know who we are, where we stand relatively to the people above us or below us, so we know which way to go, right? We don't want to, I guess most of us want to rise, so we need to understand the operation of status and hierarchy, and this is something to do with the moral order. And even if you think the moral order is immoral, you still need to understand how it works. I don't think Americans understand how it's supposed to work. Because there is a fact that America started as a republic. It's the proposition nation. Proposition just means there's a constitution and it says we are the people who whatever. And in Europe, there's no such document because they'd always been ruled by absolute monarchs, and the system of monarchy was that you just had to do whatever your king asked you to do, or else. And nobody had any rights. And over the years, in England anyway, the barons tried to get themselves some rights. telling the king he could just, come and take them away and not even accuse them of anything, the writ of habeas corpus. And eventually they got more and more rights, and then they got really fed up with their king and killed him, and were ruled by the Puritans. And during that time, the Book of Common Prayer was rejected. No one used it, and I think they complained about, extra long sermons because, well, I guess they had to work harder at justifying themselves, and so I imagine they probably had to listen to, 3 hours of talking, and I bet a lot of people just wished, oh, can't we just, listen to the priest for a bit, sing a hymn, do a reading of the Bible, and, pretend to pray and sing another hymn, and, at least and then the Eucharist, and it'll just all be broken up in a nice, orderly program. And there's a bit of, the priest says this, and you mumble something back, and, it's all quite satisfying, really. I mean, if you're just there for, the show and a bit of audience participation, and not be sitting there for a 3-hour lecture on your too low morals. So we have different, kinds of worship. But the interesting thing about Christian worship is that it's also different with all these different kinds of Christians. And they would argue about transubstantiation, because Henry, when he wrote from Rome, said we mustn't change any of the rituals because the peasants will notice, because they will have memorized every word of the prayer. So they'll notice if any word is out of place. They will notice and they will complain. And we have to keep the ritual as close to the Catholic Mass as possible. But over the years, this principle got eroded, because I guess people just got tired of the Anglican ceremony, and I guess people were just allowed to do it in their own way. But at the time, during the English Reformation, this was very important, because he didn't want the peasants to rise up against him, because they were angry at having their show disrupted by alien words and alien rituals, and it can be so upsetting. So these spectacles, these religious spectacles and processions, we see lots of processions. Catholics love their processions. The Anglican Church also, has a few processions. At some stage, a queue of men come in, go up the aisle, and they carry. I don't even know what the thing is called, but anyway, it's kind of, made into a bit of a show with audience participation, and maybe people fighting to do the reading in church on Sundays or something. And this was, well, fun. It was part of community and society and gossip and rivalry, social rivalry. And of course, when the Anglican Church was in full flow, you had to get your child confirmed, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be a paid-up member of polite society. And this was basically how Europeans were controlled. And I know the Americans tried, but the Puritans, anyway, they arrived in Plymouth colony, and they spread out, and then they found that because they didn't exist, the ancient structures of religious reinforcement, they would find in their colonies, there would be people who, maybe weren't maybe their parents weren't regular churchgoers or even confirmed, but they wanted to keep everybody coming to church, because the alternative would be, well, no one coming to your church if your standards were too high. And this thing was called the halfway covenant. And I first heard it from E. Michael Jones, who, he was mocking the Protestants while, diluting their standards and saying, well, the Catholics didn't have that sort of problem. They didn't need all the nonsense of the Great Awakening, because Catholics could kind of cleanse their minds and achieve spiritual serenity because of their Catholic confession and that kind of thing. And so they carried on doing that thing, and the Protestants had to keep adjusting their religion to fit in with their environment and dilute their principles until they're happy to support gay marriage. And this is the problem when you don't have a book of rules. But, oh yes, and the other thing was that I think some Texans were complaining about these pesky Muslims and their horrible processions wearing white, and for some reason they assumed that these brown people were Muslims, and it turned out that they were Christians. But the point about Christianity is that different kinds of Christians have different kinds of uniform, I suppose. They wear different things. There is no uniformity of practice. Well, actually, Islam is like, when a Muslim is praying, he will be doing his prostrations and, putting his forehead to the ground a few times and facing Mecca and saying, and then when they're finished, that's it, and off they go about their business. And it's only on Fridays that they stay a bit longer to listen to the sermon. And this seems, well, it's not so, okay, it's not much of a show, is it? I know, Jews and Orthodox Christians and Catholics, they delight in their long masses and their, showtime specials. But for Islam, they have the benefit of being short, simple, and unobtrusive. They kind of spread out their, religious observance, 5 times a day over the week, and so they don't feel they have to, do this big thing on Sunday or Saturday or whatever. And as long as the law of the land is in conformity with the laws of God, then I guess they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And if these laws of God support marriage and treat same-sex sex as a sexual offence, then it will keep in line those who aren't inclined to get married. So, there would be the usual criminal standard of proof. You can't just accuse somebody of being gay. You have to say, on such and such a time and such and such a place, you committed an act of public indecency, and if you're found guilty, then do you get punished by the law. But if you are discreet and you don't do it in public, nobody's going to say or do anything to you other than to say, you're not responsible marrying parents who would be privileged by the law and the government, because presumably, governments want to perpetuate themselves, and in order to do that, they need citizens to govern. But what's happening now is that the matriarchy, and this is what I call Western societies, the matriarchy does not want people to become parents. It seems to think that it is enough to rely on AI and robots to do whatever labour that humans are not prepared to do, or but I think any viable society needs to have a working class and a middle class and a ruling class. And they would also need to follow, or at least pay lip service to, the official moral system, which would have a legal system and which would have certain values, like, family values. Currently, under the liberal order, which is still in existence and not yet extinct, we have the liberal order, and the liberal order values liberty, but in a quite confused and muddled way, because obviously liberty is not something you want unlimited amounts of, because if you were so free that you could break all the laws, then you would be back in the law of the jungle, where the strong eat the weak. And this is not the way to live the good life and enjoy human flourishing. So I'm happy to say that liberty is desirable when all the necessary laws are in place. And the necessary laws do come from religion, because if it came from another human, then other humans wouldn't respect him. They'd always be saying, well, who are you to tell us what to do? You may be military dictator, but we don't think you're a good person. And so, in order to, seem to be the good person, we're back to what these barbarian kings had to do. It's like, well, okay, nobody thinks we're a good person. They only think we're warlords who are only good at fighting. So we need, somebody to crown us who's supposed to be good and holy, and that will be the Pope. And I'm saying, we can't go back to that now, can we? I mean, does any sane person want to return to the time of absolute monarchy when no one had any rights? If we had a choice, we want to live in a constitutional republic where a meritocracy will be maintained and nurtured. We don't want a caste system where if you were born in a certain caste, you would be condemned to washing dead bodies and cleaning toilets, no matter how clever you are. This is a crazy system, but probably created to keep people divided. So what? Surely we can all agree that we want to live in a meritocracy governed by a government that governs in a national interest. And when we decide that something is or isn't in the national interest, we either adopt it or reject it. And I'm saying all societies need a book of rules so that people know what they're supposed to do and where they are in that society. What is wrong with that? Why is there so much hatred and yowling and denial and rejection of this simple idea, which I didn't, it wasn't my idea. I'm just saying that's what religion must have been about. That was what it was for. If you're an atheist and you think, no, who was it who said, if God didn't, yes, I think it was Voltaire again, if God did not exist, it would have been necessary to invent him. So there. We need to invent a hypothetical being that is supposed to have created everything, including ourselves, who knows best and is more powerful than anything imaginable to tell us what to do, or we just won't listen and obey. That is the whole point of religion. And you don't even have to believe in God to understand this simple system. So the problem with Christians is, the thing is, they don't even know what's happened to them. You know, they fought the European wars of religion, and this clearly traumatized them, and so the Europeans went through something called the Age of Enlightenment, when they basically said, we're going to be scientific now, we're not going to be told what to think by, the Pope or whoever who'll just get us killed for nothing. And we're going to adopt this thing called empiricism, which is basically saying, I'll believe it when I see it. And that was the birth of British empiricism. So they questioned everything, and this is where we have got, they question the existence of God. Well, I guess, since you have a church and a priesthood, it's only a matter of time before the government decides to use it for its own secular purposes, and this has been what's happened to the Church of England. What about the Catholic Church? Well, I think the American Pope, the appointment of the American Pope was a power grab by the CIA, because it's hoping to weaponize Christianity against Trump. And the American people, I think, because, maybe Trump... Now we come to defining MAGA. What is MAGA? But we could actually break it down. Make America great again. When did it stop being great? Has this been defined? How many, American intellectuals and historians been talking about when America stopped being great? This is just, it just sounds good, I guess. Sounds patriotic, but it's fundamentally meaningless. I am proposing. Sorry. So I'm saying, I'm going to have a different kind of MAGA, which is make America good again. And that this would actually make America great again, but only if it repents of not having a religion or a system, a moral system or a legal system. And what I propose, which is secular Quranism with American characteristics, is it's not a religion. I am not Muslim. I have been saying, every time anyone accuses me of being a Muslim, I do say that I'm agnostic. I just want to be known as a moral and political philosopher. And I'm saying, any Muslim would say, secular Quranism is not Islam. They're going to say that. They I don't know, maybe someone will say it is Islam, but I'm expecting these Muslims who hate me because I'm saying that my interpretation of the Quran is better than theirs, and they can't deny it. How can they deny it? Are they going to say, such and such a... Well, who are they going to say has a better interpretation of the Quran than me? And that is why they pretend I don't exist, do not engage with me, generally, and don't like to talk about secular Quranism. Daniel Hockey can't do. He knows about me, he knows about secular Quranism, and once I nearly got on the stream, but he said, oh, but she's not even Muslim, I'm not talking to her. But we did once speak. So I'm looking at the chat now. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your good wishes, Scott, for my speedy convalescence from this this terrible voice. Thank you, Brent, for acknowledging that sometimes I make sense. Thank you, Holger, for wishing me Ramadan Mubarak. I'm not Muslim, but thank you. It's, I think, Chinese New Year, and okay, let me just check when. I know Chinese New Year was yesterday, the year of the horse, and is it today? Ramadan 2026. Oh, it's actually today. Well, isn't it nice to have all these different cultures and their different belief systems and their different calendars kind of having the same, celebrating on the same time? Oh, Brett, I do like what you said. Christian nationalism is the bastard of Christian imperialism. You know, I've been trying to explain. Okay, I think you probably will be able to find my exchange with E. Michael Jones when I asked him that Catholicism cannot be part of Christian nationalism because Catholicism is supranational, because it is not loyal to any nation at all. It's only loyal to the Pope, and the Pope wants to conquer the world, right? Even his address, it's like from the Pope to the world. So this idea of global domination of globalism is, well, it has existed since people knew there was a world to dominate. So, you know, Brent, I think I've been blocked on my Magamartha account too. I don't think I was saying anything terrible, or maybe I lacked self-awareness and don't know. Well, sometimes, you know, I'm blocked and I think, oh yes, it was probably, you know, whatever comment I made, but this time I'm actually in the dark. So I'm glad we have something in common, Brent Broley. But to be fair to BVK, I don't think he's actually promoting Christian nationalism. I don't think he agrees with it. I think his problem is that he doesn't really believe in it either. You know, it's just that it's his family tradition. You know, his father was a pastor, he's a pastor, he's got a good following of people from all walks of life who, you know, either identify as Christian or post-Christian, and they, you know, like his winsome personality, and he's very good at, you know, sending out teasers to get more people to join and talk, and for the TLC to expand. And he might be saying that secular Quranism cannot be part of the TLC. But then I don't think I'll be the first or last person to wish to infiltrate this particular demographic. Because when you think about it, let's pretend, okay, I won't even deny that I have, ambitions of global domination. So you would have to, I mean, if I could, I'd, call up Trump and, sweet talk him into, doing what I want. But since he's, not receptive, then I will have to do the next best thing, which is talk to the American people, because, who else but the American people are going to, sort their government out. I hope, Brent, you will explain to me what you mean about Viveki's opponent processing. I'm afraid I can't bear to listen to him. It's just so fake, and and his fake intensity and the waving of the arms, and coming from a Buddhist background myself, it's just a bit annoying. And speaking of which, it was only yesterday that I realised there was something called secular Buddhism. And you think, what the hell is that? And then you think, oh, it's just Westerners culturally appropriating Buddhism and selling their snake oil with it. But do tell me about your opponent processing. Where was I? So yeah, what frustrates me about the TLC is that, okay, I'm just there to kind of, push them along and nudge them. It's like, well, if you're concerned about your terrible government, well, what should you be doing? And, oh, but I hate Trump. It's like, well, do you think things would have been better with Kamala Harris? I think you'd actually be more demoralised. I know I did a thing of trying to get every American I know to support Trump because they have no choice, Do I regret it? Well, sometimes. Well, I wasn't the one who invented the saying things have to get worse before they get better. And maybe, maybe it just happens to everyone. You become president of America and somebody controls your brain, and you, even though you campaign in peace, you will be starting a war of your own. You just can't help it. Yes, I know, Brendan, that you are. I think you are a true intellectual. I don't think PVK is that much of an intellectual. I mean, I've read his Substack, and it's kind of hard to. It's kind of hard to read, and it's annoying to read. And maybe I did kind of do stuff like that, but I just learned to just not be including all these videos and whatever, and be writing essays, because it's just distracting. And if you can, you should just write in sentences, and write sentences that you're prepared to defend, and don't try to try to say something and make it so vague that nobody knows what you're talking about. But you think, oh, I feel better now that I've said this thing, but I sure hope nobody really understood what I really meant when I said this thing. Yes, I know. He Paul van der Kleen was trying to get on the bandwagon, and I think, well, he could be part of it, because there's a vacuum and vacancy now, right? Jordan Peterson is sick again. And, he never even defended Christianity. So, it's entirely hypocritical to say, you guys should believe in God, but I'm not even telling you if I believe in God. It's so absurd and cowardly. And you think, okay, well, he could at least say that he's agnostic. I say I'm agnostic, and I can just talk about any amount of theology I want, because I'm taking the teleological approach to religion. I'm saying, even if it's all, made up, it has a purpose. All made up things have a purpose. So let's understand the purpose of religion and the Abrahamic God, assuming it was all conjured out of the imagination. Because lies can be as powerful as the truth, depending on the number of people who, believe in each, right? But the truth is also powerful. It might be suppressed for now, but it can come back later, because you cannot destroy an idea. Oh, Mark Parker. He drives me crazy. Okay, he never said he was going to convert to secular Quranism, but it just annoys me so much. It's like, can you please just decide whether you're more a liberal, more a Christian? And it's clear just from the way he goes on about, Sam Harris or Doug Wilson. It's like, Sam Harris, no problem. But Sam Harris is an atheist, and he thinks religion is stupid. So obviously, Mark is a liberal at heart. He might be a liberal who says Jesus a lot. But I don't think he really means it. People say a lot of words like mantras. I don't think they really mean it. It gives them comfort, because I guess, Mum and Dad used to say it, and, the words of a prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, it just brings back so many memories of school days and childhood certainties and, that kind of thing. But do they really believe it? We don't know. Do they even actually know the meaning of the words? Or it ever took the trouble to analyse them properly? I don't think so. Otherwise, how could people be so absurd in their beliefs and self-contradictory? So, let's assume, I do assume that at heart, Mark Parker is liberal, because he expresses his hatred of Trump so liberally. And he's also said, that there was a time when he considered becoming a Buddhist, and this Buddhist monk said, you're not for us. Buddhism isn't for you. You should go back to Christianity. Yes, because, I think a lot of us need to be with people who we think share our values and our culture, and, that sort of thing, right? And because that reinforces our identity and emotional stability, etc., etc. So we know Mark Parker is a liberal. He's a liberal Democrat. And going back to Catholicism, I'm saying is not understanding the Whig interpretation of history. And the Whig interpretation of history is sacred to the beliefs of liberals. So H.M. Butterfield's book, The Whig Interpretation of History, is basically saying that ain't liberty wonderful? We started getting liberty when our Protestant monarchs rebelled against the tyranny and totalitarianism of the Pope, who conducted crusades and inquisitions. and wouldn't let Henry divorce his wife. And Henry VIII cleverly broke from Rome, created his own church, and allowed divorce. But he didn't change the words of the Book of Common Prayer. I've just realised this myself. So it still says, if you can get hold of a copy, it still says, the marriage ceremony, blah, 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 love, honour and obey, blah, 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 till death do us part. And it's like, it sounds so solemn and, final and, but it's a poetic nature of these words that, we want to hang on to them, and we get all upset when it's all, not said, or said in a different order or whatever, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, da, da, da. Yes, and the problem with Calvinism is, it's such a bleak view of Christianity. I know Calvinism was, popular with the early Americans just because, Calvinism was became successful in the Swiss Republic. So, then it's like, well, Americans are a republic. I guess we need to go with Calvinism and, only tolerate Episcopalianism. But you can see the difference between, their churches. It's so bare. It's just a stage. I mean, what is it? And Paul van der Clay, he doesn't wear a dog collar. And that immediately takes away his, religiosity and authority. Wearing smart casual, it doesn't really work. People just want, smells and bells and, old stuff, right? Yes, Brent. I do think Mark Parker's logic is circular and incoherent and obviously based on emotion and sentiment. And you could point this out to him till you're blue in the face, but some people will just, I don't care, I just like the idea of converting to Catholicism. And then you say, but you're a liberal, and how can you go against the sacred beliefs of liberals when they thought that breaking with the Catholic Church is this onward and upward trajectory to liberal heaven and the end of history. Okay, so Brent says Mark Parker's logic is circular and incoherent, and he's opposed to colonial bigotry, but has settled with Catholicism, the Church launched a transatlantic slave trade and European colonialism. Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, everybody practiced slavery. So, come on, white people, you enslaved each other too. I mean, it was Ian Michael Jones who, told me jokes about the white slaves were cheap. The black slaves cost more because they were better. They'd collapse immediately in the heat of the cotton fields, I suppose. And I'm afraid I'm also saying that slavery needs to be reintroduced to regulate your labour problems. With a right to manumission, of course. And this should be, officially done with slave accounts and, manumission levels and all kinds of things, because that's the only way to get everybody working again. And the working towards, well, no, not working towards, it means that the welfare state will have to be replaced by slavery, which could be perceived as some kind of career structure even, because there will be, of course, education and training for slaves. Brent Rowling says free will versus determinism. At least the Far Eastern cosmology is sophisticated enough to recognize non-dualism. I think they're both opposite sides of the same coin. On the one hand, we want to think we have the free will to change our lives. Excuse me, I think I'll have to go and blow my nose. Right. Okay, I haven't muted myself. So, I was reading something from Brent. Oh yes, free will and determinism. So, I think we try to dignify ourselves by saying, we are capable of changing our lives by making some life-changing decision. And for that reason, we have free will, because if we change from being an atheist to a theist, believing in God and the afterlife, then obviously our behaviour will be different. And determinism is basically saying, oh, it was always meant to be, and it can't be helped, and and sometimes people use it to make them accept a certain situation, or feel that their marriage, their love, their career, their success or failure was already predetermined. But, well, who knows? I don't think it matters. Sure, we can use these ideas to comfort or inspire ourselves, but we won't really know. Well, Brent, I'm just saying slavery is an institution like marriage and prostitution. So these institutions have a purpose and will keep popping up in different parts of the world who have no, communication or contact with each other, because it's a logical thing to do. That's what is meant by an institution. They can include war, empire, religion. That's what I mean. And obviously slavery is useful for, well, even the slave. It's like, well, if I really want this thing, I'm stuck in Europe, what a horrible place. I would like to go to the New World and find my fortune there, but I can't afford the fare. I'll sell myself into indentured servitude and get my way, get across the Atlantic that way, and I don't mind working for a few years in indentured servitude, after which I will have, made a few contacts, accumulated a few savings, and allowed to go make my fortune in my own way. What's a problem? And as for chattel slavery, I think that was probably really the real reason for warfare in the olden days, when they didn't say, oh, you violated this treaty or something. It's like, well, you've got stuff we want, and we're just going to take it because you seem a bit weak and stupid. Um, and I'm saying, there is this rule in the Quran that says, do not forbid what I have allowed, and do not allow what I have forbidden. And we know for a fact that God did not forbid slavery in either the Quran or the Torah. And the same goes for prostitution. And that, I guess if I had my way, you would all have red light districts with licensed brothels. So there you go. I mean, some Americans might see it as a business opportunity, but I think that that's the only way to regulate gender relations. Because what I'm saying is confusing a lot of men and women. Is that women are supposed to make the decision to decide with whom to fornicate, and the point is that they tend to say yes now because they've been told it's okay. I had my tea and I forgot to drink it. It's rather bitter, but perhaps it'll be good for me. Where was I? Prostitution. Yes, the confusion with women. You see, the quickest way to make men behave, or for men to make women behave, is men behave like men and women behave like women, and then the other person who is who didn't take the group that didn't take the initiative will just have to behave in a way that they should behave. So let's imagine this hypothetical situation where women all decided not to have sex with any man until they have the ring on their finger. Just imagine. Then men would have to up their game, right? They would have to up their game and not expect to, take the woman out for a test drive, so to speak, and just keep doing it. Because, since all women are prepared to have sex before marriage at some time in their lives, and of course the time is shorter and shorter on the first date, that kind of thing, then men would think, well, there's no need to buy the cow when we could get the milk for free. So that is obviously distorting the market for marriage. Or men could decide to change the rules and say, let's adopt secular Quranism, because under this rule, unmarried parents would be treated as sex offenders, and nobody would want to be treated as a sex offender, and it is always a female who is left holding the baby. It's always a man who can skip town and not be visited with the consequences of being left holding the baby. So if they change the rules, and if they took organised political action and changed the rules, then they would get the behaviour they desire from women. I mean, the thing is, I guess men are confused. They want the women that they're currently having sex with, I suppose, to be loyal to them, and they want the women of other men to, be prepared to have sex with them. And the thing is, there obviously aren't enough, chaste women or virgins to go around, and obviously these rules need to change, and a life of promiscuity will give you the attitude of disposability, the disposability of relationships. So, if you've already had 3 marriages, you're considered not a good prospect as a spouse, because you'll probably have a 5th divorce, because it'll be like nothing to you. So the idea of monogamy would tend to stabilize societies and would provide an environment for stable parenting. So we will have, a better adjusted, better educated, better trained next generation who will enter the labour force. And if you have enough people, already in your country to do the sort of thing, then you won't be always complaining about immigration. Isn't it obvious? What a shame you retracted your comments. Could you tell me why you thought Calvinists were forced to do gymnastics to avoid admitting the obvious? What gymnastics do you think they've done? If you could give me an example, please. 200 years of anthropology and linguistics destroy the validity of the Greek Septuagint as infallible text, and PVK lists post-factual worldview. I'm afraid I keep forgetting about this Septuagint thing. But I know, it's the Bible in Greek, yeah. And this means a distortion of the Hebrew text. It's basically not reading the original scripture in the original language. And I guess doing this in order to avoid coming to certain obvious conclusions about. I know that Christians are supposed to think that the coming of Christ was predicted in the Torah. I mean, obviously the Jews don't agree, and there's not much they can do. Okay. Brett says, I was referring to free will argument disrupts the omni-God hypothesis. It is a logical contradiction or fallacy. No, I mean, if God says, I'm going to give you free will, I'm not going to force you to. Not only am I going to give you free will, I'm going to let you legally enjoy it. And that's in the Quran. So that's something you can, I don't know if you read the Quran, Brent. I think you should. I think every educated man should read the Quran. Or certainly any aspiring lawyer. So you will see from the Quran that it takes a, I would say, mildly disapproving attitude. It says things like, why do you bother wasting your time and energy worshipping idols that can never help nor harm you? Why do you do it? Oh, but you're going to hell if you really believe in that sort of crap. But in the meantime, I will give you the free will, and this is supported by chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran that says, there is no compulsion in belief, truth stands clear from error. And this means that, I guess, in a society of right-thinking people, the truth will be easily distinguished from falsehood. And also in chapter 17, verse 111, it says, God does not need a protector, so no blasphemy laws. Thank you very much. And this, I think, is entirely in harmony with the American Constitution, isn't it? Making the Founding Fathers proto-Muslim. Proto-Muslim does not mean Founding Fathers avoiding pork and alcohol and doing their prostrations. It means that you are closer to being Muslim than you are to being Christian if you reject the Trinity. And as we know, the Founding Fathers were heretical Christians. Thomas Jefferson, for one, was a Unitarian Christian, and I suppose if he'd been in the old world, what he did to the Jefferson Bible would have been considered blasphemy. How dare he excise the Pauline epistles just because, well, Paul never met Jesus, did he? Let me try and understand your position, Brent. I mean, the thing is, God can give you free will and still know how you're going to behave. He knows, but you don't. But he'll, let you make your mistakes in your own way. What's the problem with that? And as for predestination, well, God might know whether you're going to end up in heaven or hell, but you don't. I'm so glad that you've read the Quran, because I feel we can talk more about things and be more easily understood. Have I covered everything I want to cover? No, okay, Paul van der Klee, I understand, he's trying to, well, I think he's thinking of his pension, right? And he's finding out ways of, increasing his live views, and he's very good at, introducing topics that are of interest. Well, they are of interest to me, and people struggling to stay Christian, or thinking of the politics of America. And I'm saying he should take the leap and interview me. But probably he's afraid, they're going to nuke his channel as soon as he has me on. Well, I don't know. I think it's worth taking a risk. And if they nuke his channel, he can go to Rumble. What's the problem? I don't think this fake debate about free will and determinism is totemic of Calvinism. I mean, Calvinism is associated with Presbyterianism, and actually mosques work under the Presbyterian basis, because there would be mosque elders, and the mosque would be serving the interests of the congregation, and therefore have to take into account the views of the congregation, and not be taking orders from on high, i.e. the bishop or the pope, that kind of thing. So, it's a difference in the organisation of these different denominations. And of course it's all political, right? And I'm saying fundamentally the success of Calvin was because he went to Geneva and told the Swiss bankers that usury is okay. And that was really the secret of his success. Now, not many people seem to know this. Maybe they don't want to talk about it, but that's it, really, isn't it? It's not this tulip thing. I mean, nobody cares about, what is it? Total depravity. Let me try. Unconditional election. Now, what does L stand for? Oh, it annoys me and I can't remember. But if I look it up and read it, maybe I will remember. Tulip Calvinism. Limited atonement, irresistible grace, perseverance of the saints. It's all nonsense. Total depravity due to the fall. Humans are completely sinful and incapable of choosing to follow God on their own. Well, I think a lot of people kind of want to believe in God. And even if they weren't told about it, they would sort of say, oh, I always felt that God existed. Unconditional election before the foundation of the world. God chose certain individuals for salvation based solely on his purpose, not on any foreseen merit or faith in them. How would Calvin know? How would he know any of this? And I don't think we need to be told that, nobody's perfect. It's not an idea original to Calvin. And I wouldn't call not being infallible total depravity. Limited atonement. Christ's substitutionary death on the cross was intended specifically to save the elect, not the entire human race without exception. How would he know? Irresistible grace. When God calls the elect to salvation, they cannot resist it. The Holy Spirit eventually brings them to repentance and faith. Okay, that's the predestination bit. Perseverance of the saints. Those whom God has chosen and called will be kept by his power to the end. They cannot lose their salvation. Once saved, always saved. How would he know any of this? He's just making shit up. And the only reason why he was so successful was because he said usury is allowed. Swiss bankers. Well, mystery solved, eh? Mystery solved. Brent says, I also appreciate PVK to some degree. Just his hypocrisy becomes clear when he can't entertain anyone that undercuts his white supremacist biases. Well, I guess he's not perfect. I know he's pandering to these, white nationalist types in the same way that Luke does. It's like, you're an author, bro. Yeah, I know why you converted to Orthodox Christianity. I know. But you find Orthodox Christianity attractive because of John Chrysostom, and we know what he said. And it was probably worse than anything the Nazis ever said about the Jews. And that's why, that's why I think Orthodox Christians are so dumb. It's like, yeah, I'm going to call myself, I'm going to put a label that kind of says kick me on my back, and says, I'm really a white supremacist, I'm really a white nationalist, Yes, I understand that predestination is determinism, but I'm also saying, nobody really knows whether their lives are predestined I mean, I resolved the situation by saying, we all have free will, just some of us will never use it, or never think to use it. And if God exists, I guess he would know, since he's supposed to know everything, where we're going to end up. But the thing is, we don't know. We don't know, so so it's always 50-50. In theory, we could redeem ourselves, and there is this concept of redemption in the Abrahamic religions. The story of Jonah. So, I hope I have dealt with all the issues raised. Let me just try and remember what we discussed. On Chris Howard's channel. Oh yes. What I said about my brilliant idea for American husbands abolishing no-fault divorce because it interferes with their constitutional rights. I think that's a brilliant way of pulling the rug out from underneath the feminists, the feet of the feminazis. And the thing is, isn't there a big enough supply of American husbands who felt hard done by, who feel that they've been victims of no-fault divorce when their wives, divorce them for no reason at all? And I think that there's a good enough supply of men who said, my wife divorced me for supporting Donald Trump, and she said so. And I have witnesses, or messages, or whatever. Just get this guy and ask him to, apply for judicial review. Like, well, what's a guy to do? He's married, he doesn't know, And there you have it. In one swift, decisive move, I have shown American husbands a way to restore and reassert their First Amendment rights. And that was probably the most important thing that was discussed on Chris Howard's channel, though not in any particular detail. And that's why I was so full of beans, talking. And now I'll stop. And thank you all for listening. It's always good to have an audience posting comments, even though they're retracted. Just as well I read them, hey?